Right. So welcome back, class. We'll be continuing from where we left off in the previous class on the Elizabethan Age. And please remember these lectures are available on my YouTube channel also. So whenever you find the time, if you're not able to participate in the lecture for any reason, you could always access the lectures on YouTube later. Right. So it's something that I do out of my own interest so that you don't lose out on any of the lectures. It's a series, so you'll find it the sequencing easier to connect later on when you try to write them down coherently, right? So we'll continue right from where we left off in the previous class. But before that, even as I tell your class about a few books that I've always advocated, this is one book called Culture and the Real, right? Those of you who are planning to do your, just two books I'll introduce today. Those of you who are planning to do your research, your dissertation, right, on any aspect of Lacanian theory, especially, or even theory in general, you could always fall back on this book. The second book is Critical Practice by Catherine Wilsey, right? Both by the same author. I've always recommended this book very strongly. So today again, I'm recommending this book. And this book, right, for the final years and the last semester, I normally make it a point to tell you guys about this book, The Story of Philosophy. Another version, this I bought just a month ago, if I'm right, uh, a bigger font, right? So reading this is easier. Please have a copy of this book to call yourself a literature student, right? And whenever you find the time, please go through at least 15 to 20 pages every day possible, right? Just for the time being, at least for the next 3 months, very crucial time for you. Please set aside all the other distractions as much as possible and please devote some extra time to, I would suggest this book because it gives you a comprehensive story of all of philosophy in a beautiful nutshell. Right, Will Durant, you must have known, right, has given us in a very engaging manner. And that's why I recommend this book very strongly. This apart, for our classes, I always go by this book, right? I told you the other day in class, if I'm right, History of English Literature by Legui and Kazamian, right? This is the book I told you. This is a huge book, right? A bulky book, but, right, it's a wonderful book, very engaging from top to bottom, from first page to last page. Very interesting, very absorbing also. You'll find it so easy. The humor, they have a sense of humor. And so that makes it endearing and engaging all the way. You'll find it very interesting. So you can also have a copy of this book. There is material available on the whole World Wide Web, but please don't go by that, especially Wikipedia's, right? They are good. Salutes to them for giving us such wonderful information, but please remember they are not authentic, right? So I make it a point not to show you PDF copies of books, but, right, real hard copies of books so that you will buy at least a few books and have a good library. Since we have tested our call and we are into the final semester of your life in literature as a student, right? From now on, you'll be doing your research or focusing on higher studies, etc., etc. Right? So please make sure that you have a copy of this book. This is a must in your library. Without this book, your study of English literature is not complete. That's why in the last semester, because you have just 3 papers this semester, if I'm right, I wanted to make sure you have this copy with you. It's available, right? Please have a hard copy. And by the end of the semester, I should be able to read your book where you've underlined, highlighted, and made notes at the end, at the corners. That's how you study, right? So now we'll continue from where we left off on the Elizabethan Age. We saw in the previous class, this is just a recap, the trio of the new learning. They were also called the Hellenists, right? The Hellenists, the trio of the new learning. We saw them: Thomas Linacre, William Grossin, and John Colet. So each of them had a claim to fame, right? Each of them. That's why we celebrate them even today, right? So you find, right, some of the claims to fame here. Thomas Linacre was a grammarian, philosopher, physician. He was the translator of the great physician Galen. Then you find William Grossin, right? He established the teaching of Greek at Oxford in the year 1490, and then, right, invited by Colet also to give lectures at St. Paul's. Then John Colet is a very important figure in Renaissance humanism. Then he was the one who emphasized that secondary school teaching should be based on Greek and Latin. So the part of the humanists, please remember, the Renaissance doesn't begin with the literary souls. The Renaissance doesn't begin with novelists. The Renaissance in England doesn't begin with religious people. The Renaissance in England doesn't begin with poets. The Renaissance in England doesn't begin with short story writers. The Renaissance in England was made possible because of the genuine love and interest of a group of people who loved humanity, and that's why they were called humanitarians or humanists, right? And that is why good learning was made possible. Where knowledge is free, Tagore says, no, where the mind is without fear, where the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. Sometimes if religion comes in, they might have privileged one over the other. In Turkey, when Constantinople, right, present day Turkey, when the libraries were burned, there was a hardcore strategy, right, on burning all the libraries. And I don't want to go into that because it's a bit controversial, but still, they said one book can substitute all the books in the library. Narrow domestic walls. Maybe if religion had dominated the scene in the Renaissance, we would not have had such wonderful scholarship that we call the new learning. So the Renaissance in England, please remember, begins only with the humanists. Then come the educationists. Then comes the Reformation and the religious controversies. See the order. So please remember, the Renaissance in England owes much, much, and much to the humanists. That's why we began with the humanists, and towards the Renaissance and the Elizabethan Age. So they were called the Oxford Hellenists, the three we discussed earlier: Thomas Linacre, William Grossin, and John Colet. These I've taken only from the book that I've acknowledged there below. Right. So these two were very good friends, thick friends, very good friends. A friend in need is a friend indeed. They say, tell me your friend, and I'll tell you who you are. Changadina Nayal, Kannadi Venda. So the same happens here. He was a very good friend, a bosom friend of both, appreciated each other, encouraged each other, inspired each other. Thomas More dedicated his famous book to Erasmus. Erasmus also did the same. So there was a kind of a beautiful relationship between these two, right? A friendship of a noble order. Now you'll find Thomas More, some qualities of Thomas More. Who was Thomas More? He was the pupil of the Oxford Hellenists. You know the Oxford Hellenists, right? So he was a pupil of the Oxford Hellenists, and he was also friends with Colet and Lilly. Lilly, he was asked by Colet to write the book associated with Erasmus in translation work. Please remember, translation work. English literature was fertilized by a vast layer of translations. If it were not for the translations in England, we would not have seen many treasures of classical literature redesigned, remolded into all the English plays that we have. Shakespeare's plays, most of Shakespeare's plays, cut, copy, paste, from where the treasure troves of classical knowledge that he inherited from these translated works. Who are these famous translators? A person was called the translator general of his age, Philemon Holland. We'll discuss them later. But please remember, the translators did a very commendable, right, appreciable job in bringing classical literature to England. And that is why translation assumes a lot of significance, right? Yeah. He did not live only with books. This is a line I've taken exactly from this book. Right? He did not live only with books. He was a well-known lawyer and at one time a member of parliament. He was a politician also. He was a lawyer. Because he was a lawyer, it helped him in his writings. Because he was a member of parliament, he had to go to places. He was able to see society firsthand, not like the people who were just writers. Because he was an MP, like Jeffrey Archer. Because he was an MP, he was able to see firsthand the problems in society, and he was asked to go on a trip. See the last point there. He was sent to the continent to negotiate a commercial treaty, and it was while on this mission that he began his very famous book. What is that? We all know that book, Utopia. So his Utopia reveals a sagacious observer. I love this expression, right? Again, right? Beautiful phrases, quaint expressions, lovely aphorisms you find here in this book. Every page, I personally feel, should be enlarged and pasted in our houses, right? Sagacious observer of his own times, an adventurous dreamer, and a disciple of Plato. But the other humanists of his day were scholars and educationists. They were not creative writers. They did not have that creative gift in them. It was Thomas More alone among the whole lot who had the creative gift in him. And that's why he was able to write something creatively. What was that? Utopia. So he gave a wonderful work, a passionate work. He was the disciple of Plato, obviously. Plato's Republic, again, an utopian land, was a great inspiration for Thomas More when he wrote his Utopia. He wrote it in Latin, please remember it. And why did he write it in Latin? Like the early trio in India, R.K. Narayan and Mulkarajan and Rajarao. If you ask them, Indian writing in English by Srinivasa Iyengar, it tells us also that they focused mainly not on an Indian audience alone, but on a Western audience also. Because in those days you didn't have much readers in the local scenario who read such scholarly works. For then English was the vernacular and Latin was something elevated. Like in India in those days, we had our own vernaculars and English was an elevated, an exalted language. So when scholars wrote, they couldn't write for the natives. The same thing happens here. He did not write in English because he couldn't cater to their sensibilities. He wanted to cater to an elite people, and that's why he wrote it in Latin. Right? So he wrote it in Latin in the year 1516. We know the inspiration. He went on a mission, and when he had a first-hand encounter with society, he thought, why not I come out with a creative land, an ideal land, where things will be as I would like it to be. What T.S. Eliot calls the what might have beens of life, counterfactuals, right? Something like that, on that order. He wrote his Utopia in Latin, and it was translated in English only in 1551. So just a few points about Thomas More, the humanist, in his Utopia, from his Utopia, right? What does he try to say there in his Utopia? Right? The protagonist there is Ralph Hitler. Usually, these protagonists in their magnum opus especially also happens to be the mouthpiece of the writer, right? Most of the time. Sometimes, in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, right? We know, right? He acts as a mouthpiece. Something similar, right? In most of these philosophical, either fiction or not non-fiction, you'll find this. So more the humanist you find in his utopia, see, he believes in peace. He doesn't want war, right? So he had a hatred and a contempt for war. And he revolts against the concept of chivalry. Chivalry means you have to fight and prove yourself. Why should you? Right? He wants happiness, peace. Tomorrow, soldiers are men slayers. Look at that. He was a man who advocated peace, happiness. Right. So he extols communism. Communism in the sense everything is shared, no private property. So the word communism means common, right? So no private property. Everyone gets everything equally, sufficiently. So that's why he says, no, he forbids the acquisition of property. Work, because the moment you acquire property and hoard wealth, you become jealous of another person. You become, focused only on acquiring money. And then, the focus in life is lost. But for Thomas More, the end of life, not the means, the ends of a person's life is happiness, right? That's why he says there, I think I've given that to the next page, yeah. He forbids the acquisition of property. Work is compulsory for all men, but only for 9 hours a day. Thus, theft would disappear from England. Only because, there are sections in society who don't work and they are idle. Theft or robbery happens in society, he feels. But if everyone were to compulsorily work for 9 hours a day, there is no possibility of theft at all. And so there again arises no possibility for enacting the hard penal laws on the people. That's the last point. So see his ideals. He was a man of a creative gift. He had a lot of ideals. So he translated these ideals into pen and paper. And now, even today, after centuries and centuries, we still read and cherish. Please remember, right? Utopia formed the basis of Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. He wrote a novel, right? Francis Bacon wrote a novel. Yes, he wrote a novel which was called the New Atlantis. And this New Atlantis is the founding book upon which the American society is based, right? The ideals that we find in this New Atlantis. New Atlantis was inspired by Utopia. Utopia, intertextuality, going back, was inspired by uh, Republic by Plato, right? So, ideals in Utopia, right? More has an ideal of a life which would be easy for the whole community. Have you ever thought of that, an ideal of a life, an ideal society? How would it be? How would you create such an ideal society? We see such ideal societies in movies, especially in Disney movies, right? An ideal society. Peter Pan, right? The 1953 version, if I'm right. I happened to see it, right, years back. Transported into that ideal world. All of us love this escapism, no? Into an ideal world. Like Keats escapes into an ideal world, the world of the nightingale, and then tries to connect with the nightingale and the ideal world and say, oh, nightingale, right, take me along with you. He doesn't want to come to the harsh reality of everyday life. Thomas Hardy says, far from the madding crowd. T.S. Eliot says, no, we are like a patient etherized on a table. So the present, when it is filled with calamities, crisis, corruption, problems, injustice, anomalies, chaos, pandemonium, what happens is It is only the writers, like we saw in American drama yesterday. It was only the playwrights who had the guts to rise up to the needs of the hour. The same way here, right? Please remember, even as you step out of your college life, you should remember that you have a great responsibility of trying to come up with ideas for this ideal world. See, a whole nation could be established by your ideals. He had an ideal of a life which would be easy for the whole community. To him, happiness is the end of existence. So it's not the means to an end. The end is not money, and happiness is the means to it. No. Happiness is the ultimate end of existence. What a beautiful axiomatic line. Happiness is the end of existence. So whatever you do towards the end, you should have happiness, not laughter. Happiness is something that sustains itself. Like the difference between joy and pleasure. Joy sustains, pleasure is momentary. When you watch a movie, you get pleasure. But joy is something that sustains itself forever. Happiness is something like that. He protests against asceticism and those who scorn against well-being and honorable pleasure. He was not for the munis, the yogis, the sannyasis, because he feels, why do you want to constrain yourself? Why do you want to make life difficult for you? You have just one life as a human being here in this planet. Why don't you enjoy it? And he says, right, you should enjoy it um, in I'll give you that line. He, honorable pleasure. Honorable pleasure. Look at that. Not vain pleasures, honorable, decent, gentlemanly, right? Or gentlewomanly pleasures. Why do you want to forbid yourself? There are some who say, don't do this, don't do that. Why do you want to restrain or constrain yourself from all the pleasures? So he was against asceticism. Hence, he glorifies the senses. The senses are nature's gift or God's gift to us. And we should use the senses for appreciating and celebrating the natural marvels around us, he feels. He believes in the essential goodness of human nature. That is, right, again, one of the principles of Utopia, the goodness of human nature. J. Krishnamurti beautifully talks about the goodness in human nature. Every child born in this world is born good, perfect. It is the society that corrupts her or corrupts him. So, this innate goodness of human nature should be nourished and cherished. In Ode on the Intimations of Immortality, Wordsworth says exactly the same, isn't it? Like trailing clouds of glory do we come from heaven, which is our home. Trailing clouds of glory do we come. So there is a smile on the lips of the child that is because of the innate goodness. The child forgets the harm or the injustice done to her because of the innate goodness. But as she grows up, or as he grows up, he or she is corrupted by the world around, says Wordsworth, says Thomas More, says J. Krishnamurti. So he believes in the goodness of human nature. In Utopia, all religions are authorized and toleration is the law. Every religion, no religion gets a privilege over the other. And toleration is the law. So he accommodates the religion, but he says every religion is equal. Right. Why did he write Utopia in Latin? We discussed in the previous slide also. More wrote in Latin, and not for the people, but for the learned. Why did he write for the learned? Many reasons. Because he wanted to concentrate, focus only on them, and secondly, they were mostly illiterate. The people there, they did not have access to education or literature, good literature. They did not have the means to get them also. The most important of all, he wanted to effect a change in the minds and hearts of these learned, who always think in a very blinkered way, who always have prejudiced, biased views or conceptions of thinking. So when he sees in society a conspiracy of the rich against the poor, this is something that hurts him. That hurt his heart, something that touches his heart. Right? Has anything like that touched your heart? Have you done justice to that touch? Something in society, some anomaly that you find in your own family, or something among the nations. When you find the atrocities done by Trump in the United States, right? Supposed to be right the most powerful nation, supposed to be the most powerful nation. Why did it happen? Or even in your own society, corruption happens. When you want to get a driving license, they ask for money, or even for anything, as something. There was a professor in our institution, an English professor of English. She was always hurt when someone hurt the dogs or the pups. She immediately rose to the occasion and immediately, uh, gave them a huge verbal backlash, verbal, uh, you can call it a verbal assault. She used to scold them like anything because, she couldn't tolerate anyone who hurt the dogs. She used to call them, Vailaji. They cannot talk. So you should be for their defense, she used to say. Even today, I think she's working in Presidency College as a senior professor. She houses at least 15 to 20 dogs in her home. I'm not exaggerating. She's my very good friend, very close friend. You can ask her also. She's in Presidency College, Professor Dr. Bindu. She specializes in Australian literature. 2002, 3, she was here in MCC, a very good friend of ours. Now she's a senior professor. Something that touches your heart. So whenever she spoke, even in lectures or conferences, she always had a word about the pets, the dogs, the animals, the cats, the kittens. So this is what, something that hurt Thomas More also. He saw a conspiracy of the rich against the poor. So his utopia is called the true prologue to the Renaissance. See what a beautiful phrase. Again, that phrase I borrowed only from this wonderful book. Nothing here is taken from anywhere from the World Wide Web, right? So it is called the masterpiece of English humanism, again from here. So why did he have this beautiful felicity of language, this fluency, this coherence? Because he was a lawyer, and as a lawyer, he had to advocate ferociously, vigorously, vehemently. So his lawyer's flow of language makes some of his sentences as much as 4 yards long. Right? That's a very humorous take on why his sentences are huge, right? Most of the times. So, right. Then his close friend, Erasmus. The first few classes I'll be going a bit slow because you should know how the Renaissance started and how the Renaissance culminated in the golden age within course, which is called the Elizabethan Age of English literature, the golden age of English literature. Right? Erasmus, his very close friend, is a Dutch Renaissance humanist, again a humanist. Right? He wrote Adages, a wonderful book of around 3,000 proverbs. And when he died, before he died, it was made into 4,150 proverbs, if I'm right. So Adages is a collection of proverbs, even today. Most of the proverbs that were written 500 years ago, even today we use them. But most of the proverbs that he gave us. He's called the Prince of the Humanists. So these proverbs, right, he collected from, and he wrote them down in Greek and Latin, translated into English later. So these proverbs, you all know them. I've just given you a few from them because we know them. We can relate to them. More haste, less speed. The blind leading the blind, a rolling stone gathers no moss. One man's meat is another man's poison. Necessity is the mother of invention, calling a spade a spade. Kill two birds with one stone to break the ice. The grass is greener over the fence. The cart before the horse. To look a gift horse in the mouth and a snail's face. Right? These are some I've given you. There are more than 3,000 of them. And here, this is another important thing that Erasmus did. He worked for years and years on two important projects. One was a collation of Greek texts and a fresh Latin New Testament. Remember, he was instrumental in synchronizing both the Greek and the Latin traditions of the New Testament. Sometimes the Greek version might have some kind of problematics with them. Then he tried to synchronize both or tally both, if you could use the word, tally both, so that the meaning or the message is not lost in the translation. So revising each in the process. This is the last for today. The educationists, right? The four educationists. First, we saw about the humanists, and now the educationists. I told you the Renaissance in England did not begin with religion or novels or prose writings or short story writings, etc., etc. It began with the humanists and their love for languages, and then their translations. And they established centers of Greek in Oxford, in Cambridge, and how they extol or spread the word around. And that's how humanism gave us the seeds of Renaissance, which culminated in the Elizabethan Age. If not for the Renaissance, there is no Elizabethan Age. If not for the humanists, the educationists, and a whole lot of other pioneers, we call them Lilly, Sidney, and Spencer. Sorry, in that order: Lilly, Spencer, and Sidney. Right. So without them, you don't have the Renaissance or the Elizabethan Age. So the first one we saw was the humanists. The second one is the educators. There are just four educationists. Now, if I ask you about the humanists, you'll be able to list them down very easily. Isn't it? The Oxford Hellenists, Erasmus, Thomas More, William Lilly, others, right? Easily you can list them down. Have them in mind so that you'll know how, right, we got our literature. That's why this age is very important. How we acquired the literature as we have it today starts here. Now come the educationists. Four educationists are there, and all of them, they are not known for the creative faculty as much as Thomas More was, but here they are known for everyone to their own aura, right? So Sir Thomas Eliot, he gave us a treatise on moral philosophy and education. It was titled Governor. Right? The spelling is archaic spelling. I've given you as it is because that's how it is mentioned in this, right? So Governor was written in the year 1531. Don't go by Wikipedia standards. The ones given in authentic books, you can make note of them, right? I have underlined something in the third line, isn't it? Written for those who would be called to govern the country. So please have a look at this. I told you, anything that is handed down to us should be looked at with a creative as well as with a critical eye. Written for those who would be called to govern the country. So not for everyone, these special elite like Eliot, see the honorifics given to them, Sir, right? Everyone is called a Sir. Sir Thomas Eliot, Sir John Cheke, Sir Thomas Wilson, Sir Roger Ascham, Sir Thomas Eliot. Now you'll be able to, if you were to do a revisionist reading, you'll be able to see why books that were written only for the elite have been handed down to us. What about other eyes and other voices? Were they sidelined? Or were they marginalized? Were they there at all? If they were there, why weren't they heard? Or why weren't they preserved for posterity? There must have been a whole lot of other voices. We don't know. Today, if someone had to write about the pandemic from the USA, right? Donald Trump's henchmen, right? If they were to write something about the pandemic, they will say, right, he was the best administrator, the president of the United States, and he quelled the virus with the iron hand. Just around 30 to 50 people died, that's it. When 100 years from now, when people get to know about their history, or in theory, we use the word histories, no plurals, they know, oh, only a few died, not many. Some hundreds died, not thousands also. So history, who says it? That's why Foucault says knowledge is always connected with power. So even as you do a reading of this history of English literature in this last semester, always have an awareness on you, this critical eye. Why were they called Sir? And what are the books written down? To whom was it written? Look at that. Written for those who would be called to govern the country, not for the lay, not for the lay people. The education or bringing up of children from Plutarch. Plutarch was his inspiration. Then the next one, Sir John Cheki, teacher of Greek, a good Hellenist, wrote in defense of English conservatism in that book, Hurt of Sedition. Hurt of Sedition, you know, again, supporting the nation. Look at that. Not something that is in common with the lay, the problems of the lay. Hurt of sedition. Why sedition is going to hurt the nation? Right? Directed against the Norfolk rebels. Sir Thomas Wilson gave a lot of importance to style. I should have underlined the word style there. Gave a lot of importance to style. Matthew Arnold also talks about it in his study of poetry, the grand style. So manner of presentation is there, matter is also there. Manner is there, matter is there. Style is there, content is there. Content, substance, matter. At the same time, something more important is also needed. What is that? Style, or the way you present it. Even today, although the actor has said that he is not going to enter politics, there are thousands of people who are waiting at his doorstep asking him to enter politics because of the legend's style, the charisma that he had, right? The charm that he had, the aura called Rajinikanth, right? His style is something so unique. You will never find that in any other actor. An actor or a writer who has got their own style, a speaker, here he talks about the art of rhetoric, speaking. A speaker who has got their own style will always be a success. If you look at the speakers down the ages, right? Maybe we should start from the famous speakers in the from the 19th century onwards. You will find it is style that makes them distinct and unique. 1963, August 28th, 63, right? Martin Luther gave his famous speech, I Have a Dream. Look at the way he intones, enunciates style. It's called rhetoric. This is one of the first, right, earliest systematic work of rhetoric in the English language. Art of, what is rhetoric, right? Rhetoric means, excuse me, rhetoric means is an art of convincing or persuading the audience, right? I should be able to convince you or persuade you to my point of view. If I'm going to stand in the elections, if I'm a rhetorician, I should have my own style, and using my own style, I should be able to convince you or persuade you to my point of view, to my line of argument. How should I do that? How will I do that? Swami Vivekananda, when he gave his beautiful Chicago address, he started, brothers and sisters, the way he pulled people towards himself. That personal chord. They say, three elements of rhetoric: logos, ethos, and pathos. Logic, ethics, and emotions. You should have all these three. The funeral speech you find in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, like that. The art of rhetoric is focused especially on exclusively on style. So, which is the first or not the first, right? Pardon me. You're not supposed to use the word first, right? Even in your dissertation, never use the word first because no one knows which was the first. So, it's the earliest known systematic work of rhetoric in the English language. In this treatise, he recommends purity and simplicity of language. What Richard Lederer tells us, no, the case for short words, you must have read it. Richard Lederer always advocates simplicity of language. Why should you use bombastic, high-sounding words when you can use simple, plain, pure words? There is a statement, no, excuse me. Birds of a feather flock together. So, using bombastic, vain words or mythological specimens of identical plumage congregate concurrently, or mythological specimens of identical plumage congregate concurrently. Who knows what she's trying to say or what he's trying to say? No, we don't. So, what's the use of saying something when no one can relate with whatever you said? Simple language, purity of expression, simplicity of expression. This is what, like, he advocates in his Art of Rhetoric. Again, Art of Rhetoric was an important tool or a skill for the rulers if they have to convince their people, especially their soldiers, right? Their people in the kingdom also. He was called the English Quintilian. Please remember, Quintilian was a Roman orator, an educator, rhetorician, and an advocate as well. Being an advocate, like Thomas More, no, it helps because being an advocate or a lawyer, like in Dunn says, no, in canonization, like a lawyer, he argues. You'll have to use a lot of words, play with words, fun with words, and you'll have to have that felicity, that fluency, that coherence. So here also you find he acquired this, he was inspired, right, from Quintilian. That's why he's called the English Quintilian. Sir Thomas Wilson. This is the last one, Sir Roger Ascham. He was the most popular. At the same time, he was also the most pungent of the group. The most popular of the educationists, four we discussed. Who are the four? Sir Thomas Eliot, Sir John Checkley, Sir Thomas Wilson, Sir Roger Ascham. He was the most popular of the four, the most pungent of the group as well. He was not only tutor to Elizabeth. See why these writers or authors alone have been handed down to us, because they had some close connection with the power structure. Have you noticed that the other voices who were very, 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 vindictive or sorry, satiric about the establishment, they were not, acknowledged, or they were not handed down to in posterity to us. The reason is those people do not serve the purpose of the masters, the power centers. So if you have a close observation of what's happening here, you'll find, right, only those who toe the line of those in power have been acknowledged all through. Sir Roger Ascham, the most popular, the most pungent, he was tutor to Queen Elizabeth and the Latin secretary also to Mary Tudor. See, two queens, he has been secretary or tutor to them. Right? He wrote two interesting works. One is called Talks of Phyllis, 1545, Love of Archery. And who had this passion for archery? It was the nobles, the kings, not the ordinary, right, the lay. Toxophilus, Phyllis means love, toxo means, right, the love of archery. Right? Toxophila's love of archery. So the schoolmaster, right, is the next one. Advice to masters on the teaching of Latin. It was written in the year 1570. So just have this in mind, a cursory glimpse. This, I hope it should be uploaded by this evening on after my classes get over. It should be uploaded on YouTube. When you are free, please go through them. Just the main authors, right, who matter for us from this particular, right, educationists. And then we'll move on to the Reformation of the religious controversies. If there is any doubt now, you can ask me, or we'll call it today. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
No problem.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.